Today we're talking about Ravana. In the most recent patch, Ravana got a pretty huge buff, which was specifically targeted at Mystic Rush, his ultimate. Just to give you a quick rundown of the buff again as a reminder, the damage itself was increased from up to 450 to 500, now starting at 200 instead of 250. In addition, the linked target mechanic was removed, so the ability was now independent of targets for the damage reduction part. Instead, it would now provide 50% damage reduction to Ravana upon landing, no matter if he hit anyone or not. On top of that, the guards that were hit by the ability will now take 10% increased damage from all sources for the duration of the ability. With a little cherry on the top, the ability is now also able to hit minions, which means that it is a little better to be used into a wave in regards to aggression. But these are just the on-paper numbers. What you will see in the background right now is that there's a little more to it. The whole damage increase for targets hit by the ability doesn't apply after the ability has been used, as you may think from how the description is worded, but rather at the same time as the ability lands. So if you hit someone with the ability, the target will not take 500 damage, but 550 damage if you've got this ability maxed out. As a base stat, obviously, if you had full penetration, if all the damage went through. Therefore, the ability has actually increased a 70 damage buff on its lowest rank and a 100 damage buff on its highest rank, which is quite a lot. In addition to the fact that it deals more damage and is less target dependent because you also take less damage. So what does this mean for Ravana? Ravana has always been a strong lane bully that hasn't really changed all too much, though he has fallen off a little bit. But his problem was usually that he didn't have much impact beyond that. In team fights he was only really useful when ahead, because he could then take on enemies in the backline and bully them out. But if he wasn't farmed enough, then he would just get killed in a direct trade by anyone that he was trying to ult, because he wouldn't get the damage reduction from those. With this change, he's still not a team fight monster. Obviously, he's never gonna be a Amaterasu, he's probably not gonna be a Vamana either, though he's coming closer to that. But he has a lot more purpose. Even if you fall behind a little bit, you will still be able to go into the backline and play very aggressive due to the fact that you have such high damage reduction. And you also give your team a lot more purpose in the regard that you can mark a target for them that they can focus down, which will take increased damage. And this damage increase is quite significant. It's at least 2/3 of Sundering Spear in damage or 1/3 of upgraded Sundering Spear. All this extra damage gives him a lot more flexibility in regards to what he can do and how he can be played. I do think that he has much more potential to be played in the jungle now as well, alongside with his former solo role obviously still being present. Before we get into the build, let's quickly talk about his abilities. Prana Onslaught should still be your primary ability to be maxed. It still gives you a lot of damage on a relatively low cooldown with high scaling. No reason not to do that. But whenever you can, you should really invest into the ultimate now. There are reasons to max Mystic Rush before, but it wasn't quite as important as it is now. Now this ability gives you so much. It gives you a lot of extra damage on the ability itself. It gives you a debuff damage increase, which will last longer, as well as damage reduction. So with every point in this ability, both will last longer, and the cooldown goes down. So the only reason where I could see that maybe you want to skip 1 point is if you want to get that 1 point in Prana Onslaught, but then again you might just hold on and not max anything else for a level to get both Mystic Rush and Prana Onslaught on the same level. Otherwise, Mystic Rush should just be prioritized over the other abilities because it has so much potential in a single ability now. What you max afterwards depends a little bit on the situation. Then Shadow Fist obviously gives you more healing. The CC doesn't get increased, and it also gives you more damage, so there's a nice benefit in that if you're looking to sustain a little more and if you're looking to deal more damage. But depending on the team comp, it may be helpful to have an extra point in overhead kick, because that ability gets reduced cooldown over the ranks, and it also gets a decent amount of damage anyways. It's not as much as 10-headed Shadow Fist, but still, if you're, for example, against a team comp with a Poseidon ultimate or something like that, and you feel like you're gonna get focused out a lot, then overhead kick really helps, especially when playing him in a playstyle that does not go into too much defense. And that brings us to the builds. We'll first talk a bit about jungle and then transition to solo, because solo is always a bit of a more complex matter. For jungle, you want to look for more aggression. You're not as forced into defensive options, you can just look for damage. Though, as Ravana, you obviously want to frontline a little bit at some point and you want to have some defense. I do feel like with his new stats, he can really benefit a lot from going for a CDR, penetration, power focus build, and he can be played very, very aggressive as opposed to the traditional defensive style. And he will still have an impact. He can basically almost be played like an assassin. Though, you may not always want to do that, so I'm gonna throw out a build here that very much focuses on this aggression, with a disclaimer that you can easily implement more defensive choices into this build and still be very effective, just not quite as quick at bursting squishies, but a lot more safe in regards to what you're doing, which will then bring us towards the solo build. The build I will propose here starts with Bluestone and Bumba's Mask. This is just your starter's Bluestone because you have a heal in your kit and you can look for a lot of aggression by using a Bluestone, a lot of extra damage that you get that way. Death Toll is okay too, but I wouldn't see as much of a reason on Ravana, who really is in your face and usually has no problem sustaining at all. After that, the first item should be Warrior Tabi, simply because it gives you a lot of extra damage and you need that movement speed. After that, it becomes interesting. I do believe that Ravana is actually one of the gods who can make excellent use of Jotun's Wrath at this point. Jotun's Wrath has lost a little bit in regards to favorability over other physical damage items, but for Ravana it is just great to have as much cooldown reduction as possible, especially for his one to be able to spam it, and in that regard there is nothing better than Jotun's Wrath when it comes to damage and the highest amount of CDR in one item possible. You can also build Hydra's Lament here very easily, and he will make great use of that because he always mixes his abilities with basics. But I do think that Jotun's may actually be the better choice. Heartseeker is also okay, but I would generally not recommend it as much on Ravana. I do think that from other items he can benefit a lot more than from this one. So the build order for me here would be Jotun's Wrath and then Hydra's Lament, or the other way around. In most situations you will not need defenses at this point, and this will give you a lot of CDR, a decent amount of penetration, and a decent amount of power, so all the stats he needs, plus more damage on his basic attacks, which is something that is always nice. After that, I do think that you will often want a defensive choice. If so, then the best option here is Spirit Rope, simply because it is such a great general counter. The additional damage mitigation really helps with the one that he already gets through his ultimate, and it also helps him complete his cooldown reduction. There are other options, especially situational choices for health, because with his damage reduction he also really benefits a lot from health. For example, you could go Winged Blade against a lot of slows. You can go Bulwark of Hope if you just need something against Magical Burst. You can go Frostbound Hammer if you really want that extra slow. I don't think he needs it most of the time, he has so much lockdown already, but I know how disgusting it can be when an enemy can absolutely not get away from you. You can even consider Stone of Gaia if there's a lot of knock up on the enemy team, or if you want to go all crazy, you can go Mail of Renewal and try to snowball a lot. I would not recommend Shield of Regrowth on him that much, simply due to the fact that at this point you will already have more CDR, you would overcap that way, and he is also not that good at self-healing if you're not reliably hitting the 3 at all times. You have to hit the 3 in order to get the heal, and others just do that a lot better by having the self-heals that are always working for them. Then after that, I would go into Titan's Bane just to get some more percentage penetration, unless you're only looking for flat pen. And if you get to that point as a last option, I would say something like the Crusher or Broader Speedstick, just to get more pen going, just to get more power going, making the most out of your ability damage. Like I said, there can easily be more defensive options implemented into this build. If you need a physical defense option, if you need a Breastplate of Valor, then go for it. If you need more magical defense through Genji's Guard, go for it. If you need anything that doesn't even have CDR, go for it. There is enough room for Ravana to be a secondary frontliner, even with this damage-focused build, so you can still make room for something if you need to. This is just the most aggressive option I would opt for. Obviously, the same won't work in solo lane. I do always believe that if you really want to go into solo lane, you should figure out which items are generally used for counters anyways. The point here is that you need to look for items that have cooldown reduction and that have defense. In the solo lane, you will not be able to bully someone out as much through flat penetration because most enemies get protection, so Jolten's Wrath Rush would be something I would not recommend. Instead, go for Breastplate of Valor, for example, or Genji's Guard if you're against a magical. Anything that will allow you to use your abilities even more while being able to get some defense at the same time. If you're going for the solo lane build, you will even later not look for much damage. You will generally just look towards more defenses and then combine that with a little bit of percentage penetration through Titan's Bane, and you will still be very, very effective. So the build will be something like Bluestone, Warrior Tabi, and then Breastplate of Valor against the physical. Then, for example, Spirit Robe, just to generally counter enemies. Then maybe, whatever, Bulwark of Hope, Winged Blade, whatever the situation requires. And then Titan's Bane in order to get that little bit of extra damage. Really depends on the situation, but generally, if you're looking for damage items, you should look for the same ones as in the jungle build. But those options should not be your primary options because it's usually not what your purpose is when you're playing a warrior in the solo and you expect it to be a frontliner. And even though he has that strong damage reduction, he still needs more defense on top of that to work in that way. Overall, I think this buff will put Ravana in a much better place, and I'm excited to see how he performs. I'm sorry the background footage was not really representative of anything. It was just terrible matchmaking. There's nothing I could do about it. I tried, but if you get matched with pre-level 30s, then what are you gonna do? With that, thank you guys for watching. I hope this was informative. I hope this was insightful. If you enjoyed this content and you're not subscribed yet, I would very much appreciate if you click the subscribe button and maybe the bell. It really helps me out and you get notified of my videos. See y'all for the next one tomorrow. Duke Sloth, out.